History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of Oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 561st episode of the History Goes Bump podcast. Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, when we get close to Halloween, we like to have these little legend shows. We've done werewolves and vampires and other kinds of cryptids. On this one, we're doing Legends of Sea Monsters.
Ooh.
Don't go into the water, whatever you do. So we're going to be sharing a lot of different myths and legends and talking about one of my favorites, the Gill Man.
Awesome.
Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Sarah, Malia, Melanie, and Donna.
Thank you so much for joining the Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
The moment in Oddity was suggested by Cassandra Distally. Back in October 1997, a giant pumpkin was speared atop Cornell University's McGraw Tower, a whopping 173 feet in the air. To this day, nobody knows who, why, or how. As the gourd lasted from month to month, suspicions grew as to whether it was actually a pumpkin. A sample of it was taken via a remote-controlled weather balloon, and it indeed was identified as the gourd in question. No true answers have been uncovered. Obviously, for the pranksters, the escapade was highly dangerous, and they likely did not wish to get in trouble. There was an anonymous submission in 1999 received by a reporter named Manju that, quote, it involved some daredevil clambering up the tower's steep spire and some strategically placed duct tape, unquote. That tipster never named names. The decaying daredevil deciduous gourd even had a dedicated webcam, which was a newer technology for the time, and had people viewing around the world. In March of 1998, the pumpkin was removed. The plan was to have Don M. Randall grab it while up in a crane bucket. However, while the bucket was unoccupied, a gust of wind bumped the crane bucket into the tower. This vibration knocked the wrinkly, decaying pumpkin down onto a construction scaffold. Regardless of how it got there, a massive pumpkin skewered onto a university spire 173 feet in the air certainly is odd.
This history podcast is haunted.
And now this month in history.
In the month of October, on the 21st, in 1917, Dizzy Gillespie was born in Cheraw, South Carolina. He was the youngest of 9 children whose father was a local band leader. Many instruments were available to John Dizzy Gillespie and his siblings. At the young age of 4, Dizzy began with the piano. After the passing of his father, when Dizzy was only 10 years old, he then taught himself how to play the trombone and trumpet by the age of 12. Dizzy idolized jazz trumpeter Roy Eldridge and longed to become a jazz musician himself. In 1933, Gillespie received a music scholarship to Laurinburg Institute in North Carolina. He was hired by the Frank Fairfax Orchestra in 1935 and subsequently went on to work with the orchestras of Edgar Hayes and later Teddy Hill. While Dizzy was with the Cab Calloway Orchestra, he began writing big band music for Woody Herman and Jimmy Dorsey. After falling out with Cab Calloway, he spent time freelancing. He continued to grow as a musician, performing with big names of the time, and then Dizzy joined the Earl Hines Band in 1942. This was when he really started developing his bebop style. This was known as the first modern jazz style. However, Dizzy said of it, people talk about the Hines Band being the incubator of bop, and the leading exponents of that music ended up in the Hines Band. But people also have the erroneous impression that the music was new. It was not. The music evolved from what went before. It was the same basic music. The difference was in how you got from here to here to here. Naturally, each age has got its own poop.
Shizzle bodizzle.
In addition to all the great music Gillespie created, he was also known for his puffed cheek style of playing and bent trumpet when he performed. In 1953, his trumpet bell got bent upwards in an accident. He liked the sound so much that he had a special trumpet made with the bell raised at a 45-degree angle. Dizzy Gillespie had a 56-year touring career by his final performance. He was an innovator in the world of jazz, and his music is still enjoyed around the world today.
The most unexplored areas of the Earth are its vast waterways. Humans can't breathe underwater, and thus our explorations of the seas are very limited. We often wonder if stories about mysterious and sometimes ferocious sea creatures are inspired by our imaginings of what could be below the surface of the water, or if they are based on true experiences. When deep-sea explorations do manage to send back pictures, some very unique and weird creatures are revealed. They help to make some of the legends we have heard about monsters in the water more believable. On this episode, we're going to explore the myths and legends and possible true stories of sea monsters.
Sea creatures can be pretty odd, Kelly.
Well, we like odd things.
We do. And I mean, some of the stuff that is down there, you get the pictures back and you're like, what in the heck is that? They're like weird, iridescent and
alien-looking creatures.
It does look like a whole nother planet down there. One of my favorite that I think is pretty weird looking are seahorses.
They are, or weedy seahorse, or what are they called? Weedy sea dragons. Look very similar, but different.
Actually leafy, and we're about to talk about them in just a second.
They have weedy and leafy.
They do?
They do.
Oh, I had no idea. Anyway, have you ever seen a seahorse in real life, like under the water, not at a aquarium?
I have. I think I have. I'm trying to remember. I think I may have in Mexico snorkeling.
Well, it clearly was a very memorable experience for you, Kelly. Mine was very memorable. I can still remember it. Snorkeling.
That's good if you can still remember it and it's memorable.
Exactly. That's how those two things go together. Anyway, so I'm snorkeling. It's a pretty shallow area, and there was a lot of the kind of seaweedy kind of stuff, although we don't have kelp. It was over here in Florida. And I could see that there was something very red. And so I swam over because I'm like, what is that red thing I'm seeing? It was a red seahorse. I almost jumped out of the water. I was so excited.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they're pretty unique. And as we were talking about, the leafy sea dragon variety of this family of Cygnathidae look like floating plants or bits of seaweed. The weedy ones would be the same way. And yet they're fish. So at first you'd see it and be like, oh, it looks like there's some leaves here in the water or some weeds floating around. And nope, it's an actual little seahorse. The gulper eel resembles a regular eel when it's swimming, but when it feeds, well, I don't know if I'd really say it looks like a regular eel because you can kind of tell that its mouth is very different.
Yeah, it's still got a weird triangular head compared to a normal eel.
Yeah, and I mean, the mouth's almost half the size of the body. But when it feeds, it looks more like a balloon on a stick. You guys have got to look this up and watch a video. The eel has a huge jaw that it extends backwards from the head as it takes a huge gulp of water, and then the head deflates as water's expelled through its gills, leaving behind tasty crustaceans. The gulper eel is also one of those deep-sea creatures that has bioluminescence. Ooh. The Dumbo octopus is actually named for Disney's Dumbo the elephant character, and that's because this deep ocean creature that hangs out around 13,000 feet under the water slowly flaps its ear-like fins to move. And then there's the vampire squid. Apparently, this creature isn't really a squid, and it actually doesn't do anything vampiric. It's just a deep, dark red color, and the webbing around its arms is cloak-like. It's very cool looking as well. I'll have to put some of these pictures up on Instagram.
Definitely.
These are all real creatures found in the sea, but what about the creatures that we learn about in myths and legends?
For many of us, our first foray into stories about scary creatures in the water involve horror movies. Jaws left many of us fearing the possibility of a giant-sized shark literally hunting humans. Giant octopuses and the Kraken have made many appearances in movies like It Came From Beneath the Sea and Clash of the Titans. And we all grew up reading books featuring Roman and Greek mythology with many varieties of sea creatures. What kid didn't fear a piranha would nibble on them in a river? And the movie Stand By Me made us all think twice about jumping in a small pond for a swim, especially the boys because of leeches.
I mean, who can forget that scene when the poor little guy looks down in his underwear and, oh no, realizes, oops.
Not good.
Were you afraid of piranhas when you were a kid?
No.
I don't know. It was like we would watch these movies that were like jungle movies. And so I always had this fear of piranhas and quicksand, like I would ever run into those here.
Well, this is true. There are mermaids which have presented themselves as both good and bad in various tales. But is there any truth to these stories about fantastical sea creatures? Anyone who has seen old maps drawn out by explorers has probably noticed that these explorers had a penchant for drawing sea monsters on the maps. Was this just for artistic flair, or were these images supposed to serve as a warning for something that was actually seen? In some cases, sea monsters were included on maps to symbolize things. For example, German cartographer Martin Waldseemüller is widely known as the first to use the word America on a map. In 1516, he created a large-scale wall map of the world called the Carta Marina Navigatoria, and on it he drew King Manuel of Portugal riding a sea monster to symbolize Portugal's mastery of the oceans. So in that case, a sea monster was decorative.
But these whimsical additions to maps weren't necessarily meant to just be decorative. Chet Van Duzer wrote the 2013 book Sea Monsters on Medieval and Renaissance Maps, and in an interview with the scuba diving website, he said, although the sea monsters on many medieval maps seem imaginative and fantastic to our eyes, in most cases they were the artist's best efforts to represent an animal that contemporary scientific texts, such as encyclopedias or bestiaries, which are medieval books of animals, said existed. We have to bear in mind that in the vast majority of cases, the cartographer was drawing or painting a creature he had never seen, copying the image from a book whose artist had never seen the creature either. There's a decorative aspect to all sea monsters, but particularly on medieval maps, the principal intention was to create a more complete image of the world by including some of its aquatic life, and also to indicate the dangers that the sea might present to sailors. And I want to get this book. It looks like a great coffee table book. It has some great images in it. Cornelius de Jode made a map of North America in 1595, and on it he drew a creature named the Hogue and described it as good to eat with a delicate flavor. But its picture on the map looks terrifying. We are left wondering what exactly this was based upon.
Is it a grouper?
Maybe, because, the best tasting fish in the whole world, if you guys like fish and you've never had grouper, once you've had grouper, you'll never go back. But they are the ugliest fish on the planet for sure. Kelly, as I said earlier, probably my favorite mythical creature that's in the water would be the Gillman, which is one of the main monsters in the Universal movie monster lineup. And that's why, because I love my Universal monsters.
Quite excited about the new park?
Oh my gosh.
At Universal Studios opening next spring?
Oh, I cannot wait for Epic Universe to open up because it's going to have its dark universe world. And I'm just going to live there.
Okay.
Just going to live there. It's going to have the best ride in any park here in Florida, too. So why would you not put the best ride, probably in the entire world, in the Universal Monster theming area? The movie Creature from the Black Lagoon is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year, 2024. Isn't that cool?
Very cool.
And we just happen to be talking about it right now. That movie was inspired by real stories being shared in the Amazon about a man-like sea creature. The producer of the film, William Allen, went to a dinner party hosted by Mexican cinematographer Gabriel Figueroa in 1941. Figueroa told Allen about a humanoid fish-like creature that supposedly lived in the Amazon River. He had heard several stories about the creature. Those stories about a fishman stayed with Allen for 10 years. And in 1951, he wrote a screenplay outline inspired by those stories that he called The Sea Monster. Maurice Zimm rewrote that initial story in 1952, and Harry Essex and Arthur Ross fleshed out the story into a script that they called The Black Lagoon. Director Jack Arnold was attached to the project, and the work of those three men, along with cinematographer William E. Snyder and aquatic cinematographers James C. Havens and Scotty Welburn, and the design of Millicent Patrick's Gillman suit, brought forward something far deeper than just a simple monster movie. And I wanted to be very specific about saying Millicent Patrick's Gillman suit because she was not given credit for that at the time. It was a man who took credit for her work.
Terrible.
She was a Disney artist at the time. So it's her Gillman suit, nobody else's. Sequels took viewers down the road of whether the Gillman was a missing link in the evolution of fish into human, or a human that was adapting back to the sea. Is it possible that humans could live in the water? Did we once live in the water and lose our gills?
Author H.P. Lovecraft embraced the idea of a fishman and wrote the horror novella, The Shadow over Innsmouth. The story is set in the once profitable port town of Innsmouth, that is basically a ghost town when the narrator of the story visits. Historical accounts he gathers inform him that an epidemic killed half of the residents. The few people who live here smell of dead fish and have flat noses and bulgy, starry eyes. A local drunkard tells the narrator that it wasn't an epidemic that killed the townspeople, but rather a race of creatures called the Deep Ones, who were immortal fish-like humanoids. They bred with some of the people of Innsmouth, and the offspring would evolve into fish people as they aged, and they would return to the ocean. The drunkard also tells the narrator that the Deep Ones intend to take over the world. The narrator eventually runs into some Deep Ones and sees that they have fish-like heads and are gray-green in color, have gills on their neck, webbed hands, and unblinking eyes. We won't share the weird twist at the end, but things didn't go well for the narrator.
I encourage you guys to read that story. It's very good. So the first creature that we're going to talk about here is the ichthyosendor, or I would like to call it a centaur because at the end it has the centaur, but
that's how it's
when I was
spelled.
Listening online, it was ichthyosendor. This is a Greek mythic being and is a triton, meaning its body is made from three things. The upper half is human, the middle is horse, and the tail is fish. It's a weird sounding thing. The creepy part about this thing is that the earliest examples of it appeared in friezes at the Pergamon altar, which Hitler had brought to Berlin because this has been considered by many to be the seat of Satan. One is also seen portrayed on a map of Scandinavia from the 16th century. These creatures are also sometimes called sea centaurs. Most myths feature them as being peaceful and they blow on conch shells to calm storms, although in some stories they do the same thing to start storms. Next we have Jormungandr.
The Jormungandr is found in Norse mythology and is known as the Midgard serpent or world serpent. This is the middle child of the trickster god Loki and the giantess Angerboda, which explains how he came to be unfathomably large. This is a sea serpent that is depicted as encircling the earth and biting its own tail. When it releases its tail, the final battle of the world, or Ragnarok, will start. Jormungandr is an arch foe of the Norse thunder god Thor. It is said that during Ragnarok, Thor and Jormungandr will fight each other to the death.
Next is the Curan crone. In Scottish Gaelic folklore, the Curan crone is a large sea monster that would eat 7 whales a day.
Oh my goodness.
That costs a lot to feed this thing. So that's how large it is. It needs 7 whales just to be satisfied. It liked to attack humans by playing a trick on them. This creature would change itself into a small silverfish, so it went from this large thing to a little itty-bitty tiny silverfish, so that a fisherman could catch it, and then once it was hauled on board the boat, it would change back into a monster and eat the fisherman. This creature is one of the most terrifying sea creatures in Scottish Gaelic folklore tradition. Next is the devil whale.
Dun dun dun. The devil whale was a mythological creature that seemed to have a demonic nature and was usually depicted as either a whale or a sea turtle. This creature was huge, giving it the ability to swallow ships whole. When it was sleeping, it resembled an island. This creature was usually attracted to a ship upon which a fire was started, and it would attack the ship and drag it to the bottom of the sea. The devil whale originated in Ireland starting in the 6th century. An early story was reported by an explorer known as Saint Brendan the Navigator, who lived from 484 AD to 577 AD. One Easter Sunday, as he was traveling with some monks, he stopped the group to camp on an island. They started a fire to cook their meal, and the island started moving. It was trying to swim away, and St. Brendan realized they were on the back of a devil whale. They all ran to the safety of their boats. There are some who referred to the devil whale as Cetus. And that's who we're going to discuss next.
Guillerme le Clerc wrote in the 13th century AD, but there is one monster, very treacherous and dangerous. In Latin, its name is Cetus. It is a bad neighbor for sailors. The upper part of its back looks like sand, and when it rises from the sea, the mariners think it is an island. Deceived by its size, they sail toward it for refuge when the storm comes upon them. They cast anchor or disembark upon the back of the whale, cook their food, build a fire, and in order to fasten their boat, they drive great stakes into what seems to them to be sand. When the monster feels the heat of the fire which burns upon its back, It plunges down into the depths of the sea and drags the ship and all the people after it. The Cetus was sometimes described as a whale, but at other times it was more of a sea serpent with the head of a wild boar. Isn't that weird?
Very weird.
And the body of a whale or a dolphin with divided fan-like tails. These large beasts grew to 40 feet in length, and their skeletons were taller at the shoulder than an elephant. The term cetacean for whale derives from Cetus, and this is the name of the whale constellation. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Next, we have the Taniwha, which is a part of Maori mythology and is described as being reptilian with spines running down their backs. At least some of them are described that way. They can appear in different ways. Some have wings and resemble dragons, and the ones found in the sea usually appear like a whale or a large shark. The Taniwha live in deep pools, rivers, or the sea. The creatures were believed to have traveled here with different canoe crews. A Taniwha could be either protective or something that was dangerous and frightening depending on how the Maori treated it. Thus, the Maori revered the Taniwha. The Taniwha would attack people from other tribes, and they usually ate those people. New Zealand's capital, Wellington, has a harbor called Te Wha na Nui Atara. Legends claim that this was carved out by two Taniwha, and one of them petrified into a hill that overlooks the city. Another legend features three sisters who were out picking berries, and one is kidnapped by a Taniwha. It takes her back to its cave lair where she eventually bore its 6 sons. 3 were Taniwha, and 3 were human. The woman trained her human sons to fight and gave them weapons, and they eventually killed their Taniwha brothers, and they were all able to escape and return to their village. If a Maori had a significant interaction with a Taniwha, it could become a Taniwha when it died. Crocodiles occasionally cross from Australia to New Zealand, but they cannot be sustained there for long as it's too cold. Some historians believe that the Taniwha were just crocodiles that the Maori weren't accustomed to seeing.
Next we have the Bakunawa. The Bakunawa comes from Philippine mythology and is a serpent-like dragon. The name means bent snake, and this sea serpent is thought to control eclipses, earthquakes, and sometimes the weather. The eclipses happen when the creature eats the moon. Filipinos discovered that the Bakunawa didn't like loud noises, so whenever there's an eclipse, the Filipinos go outside and ring bells and hit things to make a lot of noise.
Oh. And next we have the Hydra. No, this is not the global terrorist organization from the Marvel Universe. Hydra is from Greek mythology and was the offspring of the volcano god Typhon and Echidna, who was a half-woman, half-sea serpent. Hydra was a gigantic water monster with 9 heads. One of them was said to be immortal and would grow back as 2 if cut off. The Hydra had poisonous breath and blood. The creature lived in the lake of Lerna in the Archolid. People believed that Lerna was an entrance to the underworld. Killing Hydra was one of Hercules' 12 labors. He covered his face with a cloth to protect himself from the poisonous fumes and used a sword to cut off its heads. At first, Hercules had no success because the heads kept growing back. He enlisted the help of his nephew, who cauterized each neck stump after Hercules removed the head. Athena gave Hercules a golden sword to cut off the immortal head, and he placed this under a rock.
Next is the Kraken.
Fear the Kraken.
Giant squids are definitely a thing. Of course, back in the day, they didn't realize that they were. It took many, many years before we actually discovered them. But could there be one as big as the Kraken? The Kraken has always been depicted as being large enough to enclose its tentacles entirely around a full-size ship or submarine. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea features a giant squid that measured 72 feet and is the antagonist against Captain Nemo and the crew of a submarine called Nautilus, which I love the Disney version because it's so steampunky. Did you see that movie?
I did.
The giant squid attacks the Nautilus, which rises to the surface so that the crew can fight the creature. Captain Nemo ends up in a tentacle and is saved by master harpooner Ned Land, who gets the squid right between the eyes with a harpoon. And Ned then dives into the water and cuts off the tentacle holding Captain Nemo, saving the captain from drowning. This was basically Verne retelling the story of the Kraken. The Kraken was first mentioned by Norwegian king Sverre Sigurdsson. This was in 1180 AD, and it gets its name from the Norwegian krake, meaning malformed or overgrown crooked tree. The king described the sea monster as being so large that it could be confused as an island. The Kraken dwelled off the coast of Norway and Greenland and liked to hang out in the waters near Iceland. Icelanders called it Hafgufa and described it as being the largest of the sea monsters. Stories of the Kraken describe it as looking crab-like with long tentacles that could reach all the way up the top masts of ships. So this creature is octopus-like, but it is different enough that it's not just a giant octopus. Scholars believe that early Norwegians would see bits of large squid or octopus washing up on the shore, and they form their myths of the Kraken around that. Of course scholars would say that, but we know they actually saw the darn thing.
This is true. Next, we have Scylla, which actually started off as a water nymph who was the daughter of Phorkys, a Greek sea god, and Ceto, a sea goddess. This is the ultimate sea monster who is described as being man-eating, and she might have a bad disposition because one story claims that Scylla had been a beautiful woman who had the sea god Glaucus fall in love with her. He went to a witch and asked her to make a potion that would make Scylla fall in love with him. The problem with this is that the witch was in love with Glaucus, so out of jealousy, she made a potion that turned Scylla into the hideous beast. What made encountering Scylla even more dangerous for sailors was that she was positioned across a strait from a sea-swallowing monster named Charybdis that formed whirlpools. So sailors would try to avoid the whirlpool and pass really close to Scylla. The distance between the two was described as being within arrow's range. This kind of scene is played out in Homer's Odyssey, and 6 sailors are grabbed off the deck of Odysseus' ship and swallowed whole by Scylla. Our modern era has coined between Scylla and Charybdis as between a rock and a hard place.
Next we have Triton. In Greek mythology, this was the son of Olympian sea god Poseidon and Amphitrite, who was the queen of the sea. The best description of Triton is that he was a merman with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a fish. If you've seen the movie The Little Mermaid from Disney.
Yes.
Her dad, that's Triton. People described him as being dreadful. He used a conch shell to control the sea. And this leads us into talking about merpeople. Mermaids and mermen are water creatures that have the upper body of a human and the bottom half of a fish. These creatures are associated with weather on the sea like storms and floods, and they are sometimes blamed for shipwrecks. Merfolk have appeared for centuries in the folklore of nearly every culture in the world. The most popular story that is carried over into our modern era is The Little Mermaid, which was written by Hans Christian Andersen. The first appearance of mermaids is traced to 1000 BC, and a story that originates in Assyria. The Assyrian goddess of fertility, Atargatis, became a mermaid after casting herself into a lake. She did this because she ended up killing her lover. She was so beautiful she couldn't completely transform into a fish and retained her human form above the waist.
Scottish myths feature the Sisk, which was the maid of the waves and had the form of a woman above the waist and the tail of a salmon. The Murrow were the merfolk of Scotland and Ireland, and they not only feature the traditional human body with fish tail, but they have webbed hands. The mermaid of the Starbucks logo is a Melusine, which are found in mainland Europe, and are freshwater mermaids that can have 2 tails. This mermaid could take on a human form for as long as a week, so she married a human. She would transform into her mermaid form once a week while taking a bath. Kind of like the movie Splash.
Did you ever watch that?
Of course.
I loved it.
She forbade her husband from coming into the bathroom when she was bathing, but one day he did, and when he saw her tail, she left him forever.
You would think it'd be the other way around, but...
Right.
Germany has the Undine, or Undine, which was probably inspiration for The Little Mermaid. The Undine was born as a mermaid and exchanged for a human child. She grew up and married a human who rejected her later, and Undine returns to her family in the sea, but warns her husband that if he marries another woman, she is duty-bound to kill him. We'll just say the husband ended up dead. Likewise, the Little Mermaid fell in love with a human prince, but he rejected her and married another, and the Little Mermaid starts to dissolve into sea foam and is rescued in the last moments. Not by the prince, by something else. Not quite like the Disney ending.
No.
In the Disney movie, she gets her man at the end, but that is not the way Hans Christian Andersen wrote it. Cambodia and Thailand have the legend of the Golden Mermaid who is named Suvarnamaka. She falls in love with a prince and has a baby with him. What's with mermaids and princes?
I don't know.
They like to make babies. There are mermaid stories from Africa, New Zealand, Cameroon, Brazil, South Korea, China, and the list goes on. There are those who believe that early stories of mermaids were possibly sea cows or manatees. They're cute, but I would never mistake them for a beautiful woman. And don't ever tell a woman that she looks like a manatee. I mean, this is not a good thing. Sightings of mermaids continue today, although scientists claim that there has never been any proof of those sightings. I remember I think it was the Travel Channel. It was either Travel Channel or Discovery Channel. I was so excited. They were having a documentary on mermaids, and they were like showing pictures that people had captured like on video. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And then I got about 15, 20 minutes into it, and I went, is this for real? So I looked it up online, and I'm like, oh, it's a mockumentary. And then I was like, how stupid.
And then got all mad and turned it off.
I did. I was so excited to have something about maybe legit mermaids. And some of the stuff was so well done CGI-wise, clearly, that I was like, holy crap. Because there was one, I think it was over in Israel. And there was like somebody looking down on like this, it was like an outcropping of rocks out in the water. And I mean, it really looked like there was a mermaid down there waving. And I was like, oh my God. And then it went a little bit further, and I'm like, this is either, I mean, it's like these people are acting, even though this is a documentary. And I'm like, what is this? And then I was like, oh, because I hadn't heard of mockumentaries at the time.
Wild men were popular in folklore, and one story that was told in 1210 featured a wild merman of sorts. The story was told by a monk named Ralph of Coggeshall. He wrote, "Men fishing in the sea caught in their nets a wild man. He was naked and was like a man in all of his members, covered with hair and with a long shaggy beard. He eagerly ate whatever was brought to him, but if it was raw, he pressed it in between his hands until all the juice was expelled. He would not talk, even when tortured and hung by his feet. Brought into church, he showed no signs of reverence or belief. He sought his bed at sunset and always remained there until sunrise. He was allowed to go into the sea, strongly guarded with 3 lines of nets, but he dived under the nets and came up again and again. Eventually he came back of his own free will, but later on he was never seen again." Ralph noted that people didn't know if the wild man was a mortal man or some fish pretending human shape, or if it was an evil spirit hiding in the body of a drowned man.
Isn't that weird?
It is weird.
Next we have sirens, which I could never be because I can't really sing. Sirens in Greek mythology first appeared in Homer's Odyssey, but were not described. Other works have described sirens as being part woman and part bird. Sometimes they were depicted as birds with human heads. Sirens live on small islands in the sea and can also be found in the water. They have a unique and beguiling power. Sirens have beautiful singing voices that entrance sailors, and this leads those sailors to their deaths. Sirens would sometimes be used as synonyms for mermaids, but they clearly were a very different mythical creature. The melding of the two started in the medieval period. So a lot of people think that sirens are just another kind of mermaid, but that's not how they started.
And next we have the Loch Ness Monster. We weren't sure about bringing the Loch Ness Monster up because stories have been told about this monster for centuries, and yet it seems that sightings in our modern era have been debunked as hoaxes or identifiable objects or animals that were mistaken as a sea serpent. For example, an otter was once thought to be the Loch Ness Monster. Most people call the monster Nessie. It is thought that it was first sighted around 500 AD at Loch Ness, which is a large freshwater lake near Inverness, Scotland, in the Scottish Highlands that reaches a depth of nearly 800 feet and is the largest volume of fresh water in Great Britain. The interesting part about this first documented sighting is that it was recorded in the 7th century biography of St. Columba, who was an Irish missionary that introduced Christianity to Scotland. Now, while most stories about Nessie don't seem scary, St. Columba stopped specifically at Loch Ness because he had heard that there was a beast in the water that was killing people who would be swimming in the lake or fishing on it. And it just so happened that St. Columba saw the monster about to attack a man, and he invoked the name of God and yelled, "Go back with all speed." The creature retreated and never seemed to attack anyone again. Of course, we also have Tessie in Lake Tahoe.
And there's Champ.
Yep.
in Lake Champlain. I mean, there's lots of these Loch Ness monster type creatures all around the world.
Right.
I do sometimes wonder if they were a thing way, 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 way back in the day. Maybe at this 500 AD that was a dinosaur carryover, maybe still. Who knows? I mean, Loch Ness is deep enough to have that kind of a monster there, but it seems like with all of the research that has been done, I would think at this point they would have seen it or something. So our final sea creature is Leviathan. And if you guys want to get even more details on this, my other podcast, The Ghost in You, I did that was the first episode I ever did.
Indeed.
So that will give you more specifics. Leviathan shows up in a lot of literature and is always presented as a demonic sea serpent that is the embodiment of chaos. Of all the mythical sea creatures, This is the one I believe in because it comes up in the Bible many times, so I think this is a real thing. Leviathan appears 6 times in the Bible in 5 verses or passages. We want to share the most significant passage, and this is Job 41. This is a real passage out of the Bible, Kelly. Most people don't know that this is even in there.
Right, I know.
Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep begging you for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on a leash for the young women in your house? Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its hide with harpoons and its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength, and its graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth, sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze, and flames dart from its mouth. Strength resides in its neck, dismay goes before it. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined, they are firm and immovable. Its chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified, they retreat before its thrashing. The sword that reaches it has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron it treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like chaff to it. A club seems to it but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. Its undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a glistening wake behind it. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty. It is king over all that are proud.
Leviathan goes back to a Babylonian creation myth as well, when the god Marduk defeats the sea serpent goddess Tiamat and uses her body to create the heavens and the earth. The Jewish festival of booths, known as Sukkot, concludes with the following prayer. May it be your will, Lord our God, and God of our forefathers, that just as I have fulfilled and dwelt in this Sukkot, so may I merit in the coming year to dwell in the Sukkah of the skin of Leviathan, next year in Jerusalem. Also as part of Jewish tradition, Leviathan is said to send so much heat out of its mouth that it boils the waters of the deep, and that it carries such an odor that no living creature can stand it. Some Gnostic sects identify Leviathan as an Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. So just like the Norse Jormungandr, all sea serpents seem to be terrifying, and Leviathan seems to be the most terrifying of all.
Clearly, there are dozens and dozens of myths and legends that include monsters that live in the sea. These tales have endured for centuries and even feed our current fears of what may lie below the surface of the water. There are very real and very deadly creatures that live in the waters. Are some of those creatures related to these mythical beasts? Did any of these mythical beasts exist? Are these sea monsters a real thing? That is for you to decide. Well, I know I won't get into any waters here in Florida unless it's the ocean, because I'm terrified of alligators.
If it's wet, there's alligators in it.
Yeah, if there's a pond somewhere. I had some friends who had moved here at the same time that I did from Colorado, and they lived in an apartment, and the apartment had told them, yeah, we have some ponds on property, but we don't ever have any alligators in them.
Liars.
And I said, did they have that in writing? Because there's no way they can promise that. There is not a pond that an alligator will not find its way to.
They go cruising around our neighborhood.
They do. They do walk around. People found them on their front porch. And sometimes when you're driving along the road, it might just be there's like a gully that has water in it that, we get a lot of rain or something. And sometimes you'll see an alligator just sitting down in that. So a lot of crazy stories here.
Very much so.
It does make you think.
I love them.
When you have stories from all around the world, just like the flood myths and stuff, it's like there had to have been something to these stories that they came up with these all around the world. Something we'd love for you to come up with is our website, historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com or make comments at any of our social media out there. We did get an email from Lindsay, and she was letting me know back on the Croak-Patterson Mansion episode, I asked, hey, does anybody listen to KOA or KHOW? Remember that back in the day? And she actually knows all about it. And her aunt was an executive producer for 850 KOA.
Nice.
So I thought that was very cool. She's like, I'm going to ask her about some of those investigations that they did and see if I can get any information. So thanks for sharing that, Lindsay. And Eric Jammer in the crew had shared, so about the newest episode, I stayed at the Lord Baltimore Hotel for a music festival a few years ago, and you can feel the energy as soon as you walk in. I could barely sleep at night because I felt like I was being watched the whole time. Also, they do keep a log of guests' paranormal stories.
Very nice.
Yeah. And Chelsea shared in the crew, she put some pictures up, and she goes, tonight I was going through some pics of our time in Ireland in 2017, and something told me to look at the specific set of photos. These are the ruins of the Muckross Abbey. Tommy and I took a tour of Muckross House and ended up on a carriage tour where the guide just let us get out to explore the ruins by ourselves after we spotted them during the ride. It felt so forbidden, like we shouldn't be there, but I figured it's because we always have so much red tape around things here in the U.S. Surely we couldn't just be allowed to walk around these crazy old crumbling ruins unescorted. I remember having an uneasy feeling while walking around and recall our guide saying it was in ruin due to Cromwellian forces in the 1500s, but I never bothered to look and see if it was haunted until now. I know. A quick Google search told me it's considered to be the most haunted place in Killarney. Anywho, I'm sure it's pareidolia, but look in the doorway behind where we're standing. It looks like something or someone is standing there watching us. And it definitely looks like a white misty figure.
Yeah.
It probably is pareidolia, but it's a very cool photo. Thanks for sharing, Chelsea. Want to thank you guys for joining us on this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Want to keep the spooks away? Give us a review.
Test. We're ready. We have colds. Hopefully we sound okay.
Great.
Gizzy
Gillespie. The most unexplored areas of the Earth are its vast underways.
Underways?
Underways.
We have a lot of underways in the world.
Humans can't... Really? We can't?
Did you know? Kelly, did you know that humans can't breathe underwater? It's a fascinating little fact that we're going to share with all of the listeners.
Humans can't breathe underwater. I can't say it,
and
apparently.
Kelly can't say underwater.
Sigmund the Sea Monster.
Who's Sigmund?
Sigmund was a show like around the time of Land of the Lost.
Really? How
Yeah.
did I miss that?
I don't know.
Huh. I'm going to have to look it up because maybe I do remember seeing it and I just don't recall it right now. Leaving behind Tusty.
Testy crustaceans.
I said Tusty. You said Testy.
I have a friend that's called Captain McCracken
Oh.
because whenever he wears his bike shorts, you can see his McCracken.
Oh, we don't want to see that.
No, we don't.
I actually have a, what is that? Is that a whiskey up there on the shelf that's Kraken?
Oh, yeah.
And it looks
I
like it
don't
has
know if
tentacles on the sides
I
of
don't
it.
know what kind of alcohol it is, but it's a Kraken.
It's a cool bottle. I always buy the alcohol for the bottles. Swear le swear. Like swear. Swear like swear. I'm reading my notes. That's not supposed to be out of the general public.
He was naked and was like a man in all of his members.
All of his members? Oh, my. Kelly, you are such a 13-year-old boy. She's like, and was like a man in all his members.
Covered with hair.